I'm Henry Badgett, and I'd just like to say thank you to the Foundry first for having me here. I've been using Nuke for getting on for 20 years, and I'm sort of a, that's my tool, really. Now I'm supervising more, and I'm doing less Nuke myself, but having used it for so long, it's a real honor to be asked to come here and do a talk like this. So thank you, Ali, and thank you, Elise, especially. This talk is kind of a talk of two halves. I'm going to do a sort of bigger picture overview of one sequence that we were involved in, which shows you sort of how a smaller to medium-sized studio can bring to a production this sort of, compete with people like MPC and ILM who were doing much larger field battles in the same film. And we were doing a huge battle scene as well, and just what that really looks like, what goes into it from the sort of studio point of view. And then the second part of the talk is a much deeper dive into the compositing of one particular shot in a different sequence. I think I'm going to race through the sort of intro section because I think I've got a lot of content to get through, and I'm pretty excited to share most of it. I wouldn't want to miss it. So my company, Blue Bolt, was founded in 2009. We were boutique for the longest time, and now we're sort of edging mid-size. Which means that we sort of employ between 100 and 150 people most of the time. Usually about half of that is artists. We became known for doing season 1 of Game of Thrones, and then mainly for our sort of high-end TV work like Peaky Blinders and The Last Kingdom, but we've always done film work alongside that as well. In a given year, about half our work will be film and half will be TV. Napoleon. So what I'm going to start with really is just to play the sequence so that we can all see what we're talking about. It's 6 minutes long. I think I'm going to play it all the way through because it's sort of just relax and enjoy for a minute. But I think it's so important to see things in context. It's such a huge part of putting individual shots together. And I can never get the point across enough to artists that they need to pay attention to the context of their shot. And they can save themselves a lot of time by looking either side and just figuring out the continuity before I have to look at their shots and tell them the same thing. So this is the Siege of Toulon. There's no real spoilers because it's right at the start of the film. It's worth watching on a big screen. You've probably missed it now, but yeah. And there's a director's cut coming out on Apple TV quite soon, which will have a few more shots in it.
Take those guns, and we can fire onto them in endless blockade. Surprise is my advantage, but I will win by fire. I cannot wait for your arrival. Your brother, Napoleon.
Oi, wanker! Move along now! Go on, move! Move them fucking guns! Last chance! Fucking move them guns! That's what it's like! Get fucking moving now!
Pints of beer and bottles of sherry to help load it.
Ready the cannons! Sir! Yes, sir! Marchers! Elevation! 4, 6, 0! Fire! Juno! He needs shots! Fire!
There we go. So that's what we're going to be talking about. Of course, it starts with filming it. So on this project, Blue Bolt didn't have anybody on set. For us, this one started after they had filmed it. The producers essentially get in touch with us and say, here's a long list of all the work that's involved. We're talking to, we're going to need maybe 5 to 10 different vendors to do all of this work. Would you like to have a look through this list of work and bid on the bits that interest you? It was a very interesting sort of proposition. And so we go through and we think about the pyramids. We do a lot of environment work. We think about Blenheim Palace, transforming that into Moscow, and we think, yeah, we could have a stab at that. And then we get to the naval battle in Toulon and think, actually, this is a real sweet spot for us because it's like a step beyond environments. It's the sort of thing that we really want to do more of. We've actually got a lot of experience with big ships, with CG ships. We've done them on Northman, a film called Bell. The Last Kingdom has ships in. I mean, it's a very, very Blue Bolt kind of asset. We're comfortable with ships. And as you'll see, we sort of did a breakdown of that and thought, yeah, I think we could bid on that. That would be that wouldn't be a silly thing to do. And we were like really happy to be awarded that. Having done that bid, shortly after that, they deliver a rough cut, and then we can see what a terrible mistake we've made. You get that, and you get a whole load of notes about just how much work is involved. And if anybody saw the talk yesterday and thinking about Ridley Scott and the way that he likes to do things, there's always more than you expect going into a shot. So you think you're just doing the background DMP environment, but in fact, you're also signing up to do, gunfire and bits of Ridleys in the air and birds and all of that sort of stuff. So we're just going to whiz through some before and afters, which is, I tried to pick a sort of representative mix of ones that you would expect and maybe ones that you wouldn't. So the top frame looks like there's a DMP in the background, but there isn't. That is Malta, and all of this scene was filmed in various locations in Malta, and you can just see why it's such a good place for them to go and how much they saved by doing that. The bottom one is a wider view of the shot that Charlie showed yesterday, looking down there. And that's our environment of the Toulon fort down there with the British ships in the water. By the way, this scene is it's based in historical truth, just greatly condensed. So in the film, it all appears to take place in like one day or 20 minutes. in real life, it was a siege that went on for several months. But the main beats of Napoleon's strategy are sort of all true. And the explosion at the end of the scene, it was an ammunition ship, so a ship that was carrying ammunition for all of the other boats, called Iris. It really was hit sort of by accident. They didn't know it was an ammunition boat. They weren't aiming for it. It just got hit and it exploded. And it was one of the biggest sort of man-made explosions at the time that there has ever been. So Toulon is on the south coast of France, and the explosion was heard on the north coast of Africa in real life when it happened. So, and they bring this to us and they say, we want like the biggest explosion, Napoleonic style that anyone's ever seen. And it was a real struggle not to make it look like a nuclear explosion, because obviously we can do any size explosion you want these days. Next, this gives you a hint of what the landscape there looked like before, with the hotel apartment blocks in the background and our ship, and the just starting to see how much that final touch of putting the atmosphere in the air contributes to a comp. And there's a special Ridley request. This donkey. So the shot was completely finished and signed off, and then the next day we get a request. Ridley says, "Can you add a donkey?" Sure. It just so happens that we had an element of a donkey that wasn't used in a previous show. It doesn't always work out that way, otherwise we would have just had to have said no. And then the bottom one, so on the left, this is the ship that they really had. I don't know how many people saw that interview Ridley did with Dan Snow. There's been a bit of controversy about, it was all real. Well, I mean, this is, as far as I will meet Ridley on that he did really have that ship there. To him, this was the shot that he filmed on the day. He had a real ship, he pointed to the camera and he filmed it. And then what it actually ended up being, that ship was, the plate was flopped, the ship was moved, and we added in another larger one in front and lots of other ones behind. The rowboat element was also a real element, not shot for this. So there was a lot of this on this film. It was just, there was so much planned, but there was also so much added, which I really enjoy, that sort of let's roll with the punches kind of way of working. But that meant, taking that rowboat element off of a plate that just happened to be at the right angle, and worked for it. Up at the set for the battle, it was a set built on in an area of Malta's film studios that looks exactly like the set looked anyway, but they still built the set. I'm still confused about the choices that they made about that, but we'll get into it in a minute. And then you probably can't see, there is this shot we had to paint a cameraman out of. He's hiding, I think he's hiding there. That's the after, that's the before. I think there's a tiny little red dot you can see, maybe you can't see, but I promise you there's a cameraman there that we had to paint out. And this is an illustration of Ridley's filming method, where he likes to use multiple cameras to cover a scene, just run it once, maybe twice if it's a disaster, and then move on. And which is great for him, and obviously not so great for us. But the on-set supervisor, Richard Bain, I was chatting to him, and I've got a talk coming up with him at the VFX Festival soon. And he said that he actually really enjoyed that, because for him it made a fairly predictable shooting day. He knew that they wouldn't go over every single day on the hours that they were committed to, and that it really focuses everybody just to think, we're just going to do this basically just once, and because we're going to get it from 4 different angles at the same time, we're going to know that we've got stuff. So yeah, this one, not too bad. But then they come to us with this. You see that, cameraman? And they say, okay, the last one was good. How about this one? And we're like, oh. And I don't know if you remember the shot in the scene, but the smoke is drifting past, the soldiers are drinking and slapping their thighs and everything. There's a lot of movement going on behind that cameraman. And so they gave us alternative takes, but not very many, maybe just one. And we managed to salvage something, so I hope nobody spotted that on the run-through. But that was like one of the that was a big stretch as well, because that was literally like a gift to a compositor. Like, you think you're doing okay, try this. The bottom two, this is just the absolutely sort of typical, this is what was planned. This is what they had in their heads when they come to Blue Bolt and say, can you do the environment work for us? So you've got the octagonal fort and the wall, that is set. The ground is like the sort of car park area of the film studio. And in the distance, so obviously before on the left and after on the right, but in the distance over there, that's like another part of Malta with a bit of water in between. And on the right, that's our DMP. So actually sort of very similar to what was there anyway, but just trying to remove all of the modern lighting and add a slightly more contoured skyline with the hills there. And then just because the details always matter, like there was a little door in the set here that had to go. There was another tower that needed to be added here. The flags on top of these had to be made to move. And the lit fire that the soldiers are drinking around is added up there as well. And also, I don't know if you can see, but the sky is just slightly darker to make it feel more like it's the middle of the night. Top left, this is the, most of you saw this yesterday, so I won't dwell on it. That's the ships in the harbour. But from a sort of comp point of view, there's just enough real stuff, again, in there to give us stuff to sort of, grip onto and work with and see if we're adding more stuff in, what it ought to be looking like. And that is a huge help. It's so difficult to do this sort of shot from absolute scratch. And if you attempt that, they always look a bit off. So just having that much reality to get to that is all you need. And then the one at the bottom, I just think it's very effective. I love the idea of like removing the ground level, lowering it. Personal favourite. Okay, so that was the before and afters. Just that's the set I've got for you. So this was the list of assets that we ended up agreeing to build for them, which for us at Blue Bolt was probably, I'd say definitely the most we've ever done on a single show. So it was a bit intimidating, and we were trying to figure out what level of detail all of these needed to be done to, which was specified in the client's original sort of document. But we're still wondering, like, we know that they're going to be shooting a lot of practical elements for splashes and water and ship destruction. They did large miniatures, which they exploded. And we were thinking, are we going to be using the CG, or is it going to be real? A bit of both? I don't know. But so we make allowances for all of it. And each... I'll get to the ships in a minute. That's a photo of the real location. So actually back here on the left, that's the film studio, and that's the area where they built the sets. This one is Fort St. Angelo, which was more of a reference for what they wanted the walls to look like, and that sort of height. Good scale comparison with the yacht in there. Bit of early art department concept work, just really, really nice, rich textural stuff. It's so helpful to have such detailed, evocative images to start with, even if you don't end up quite like that. Because it just gets you thinking, like, there's a lot of detail in there, and that is going to have to be sourced from somewhere. So, like, all of the soldiers walking around and the flags, and we're thinking looks like a static camera, so it's going to be a comp solution. That's great. Cheap. Nice. Here's a diagram from Ridley, and the thing I want to draw your attention to here, Toulon should be a 10-camera event. Impressive, huh? And then there's labels. You can see there's 4 cameras over here, there's 4 on the other side, and there's 2 on the top of the wall, and this is a sort of schematic of just helping everybody understand how the whole concept of this scene works. And as usual in a battle like this, it has a sort of left to right drift, which they maintain all the way through the edit, which is very useful, just keeps us subconsciously aware of what's going on. So yeah, I don't know whether they ended up using 10 cameras I almost certainly not quite that many, but that was the aspiration, which I like. Just an example of Ridley's storyboards, and right at the end, I've got my favourite Ridley storyboard to show you. Little teaser, and this is storyboards being developed by the film's in-house like previs team, and like at one point they were asking us to send over initial ship models that low res ones that they could render out and use for this kind of previs. This is supplied by the on-set department, which is interesting. So for the longest time, while we were actually working on the show, I thought that there were two sets involved, or two locations that we had to stitch together. And I thought that one of them was real and one of them was the set. And right near the end of the film, I actually realized that both were sets, which just blew my mind. You can see up there the white wall is what we were looking at. On the lower level, it's where they fire the cannons from at the start of the scene, and then they put the ladders up against it. And then as soon as you're up there and they've climbed over the wall, you're on this other set, which is against the blue. So to me, just a mind-blowing way of deciding to do it. But in the end, it did make sense. And that's a view of the two sets again. So that's what I just said. Yeah. So we start building the fort. It's a large CG asset. And it's got to work from all of these different angles, daytime and nighttime that you saw. So when Napoleon is doing his scout and planning his attack, and then during the actual the assault as well. This is what it's looking like as we're building it. Note that we're trying to build it in a sort of modular way so that it's not one super heavy asset that just gets impossible to render and no one knows which bit of it they're meant to be doing. So it's sort of, we're aiming to do like bite-sized chunks that we can give to one artist and he can like hold it, she can hold it in her head. This is the DMP development. So there's a sort of maybe 180-degree DMP that wraps around that whole environment. Remembering that in the end, when the shots are composited together, there's normally so much smoke and foreground action that you hardly see any of it at all. But I think it's nice to appreciate how much detail there is in that. And I think the original source for this now, you can like rip the geometry off of Google Maps, and you can't use it. You're not meant to use it like one for one, but it's a great reference for how that sort of texture looks. And if you're doing historical cities and villages and stuff like that, it seems like there's always somewhere in the world you can go and find a city or a village that looks like the one that you want. So that's great reference for that. And then adding the lights and then doing the comp. And again, I love, if I wasn't on set for this, but if I was, I would have made the same choice. Lots of smoke going over the blue screen and off the blue screen. It doesn't matter. In the end, it's a bit more difficult, but it gives you a better result if it's there on the day. That's not the finished comp, but it's just you can see the DMP in the background there a bit more clearly, and the dome on the set extension, you can see that's not quite integrated yet. There's a selection of our ships. Each one of these larger ships had different variations on the color scheme that it had. And there was a whole load of prison hulks that we built in the middle right there, which they did make it into one shot in the distance, but like we massively overbuilt that particular asset. But I don't mind. I mean, that was just that one asset that we overbuilt. Everything else was sort of appropriately to scale. Sometimes the best comp for me is no comp. So on the left, you have our lighters slap comp of the CG HMS Victory that we built. And on the right, you have the real thing. I'm so proud of this. I think it's absolutely brilliant, and the image on the left I think actually looks more real than the one that ended up in the film that got notes, shall we say. And that's the same thing from another angle. So pleased with that. We did some birds. I put this in for the entertainment value, really. With smaller assets like this, we do often start by purchasing a model off of TurboSquid. There's no shame in that. But then there's always a lot of extra work to do. So in the top, that's sort of out the box from TurboSquid, perhaps on the seagulls. And this one is us adding the sort of subsurface and extra texturing and stuff like that to get it working to the level that we need. Up here is an example trying to keep in mind how large these assets are actually going to be. So perhaps this level of detail, again, slightly overkill. But you just never know, because you need to be ready when Ridley says, I want a seagull to fly straight past the camera. You know, they ask them to be built to mid-level of detail or something, and we're like, we'll just play it on the safe side. Obviously, this one is his animation. This is a cormorant, and he would be lifting off and flying horizontally across the surface of the water. And the artist that put this together decided it was just, obviously, didn't want him to fly off screen, but it's sort of comical. I like it. Reference, here's an example, a painting reference and a piece of film reference. So useful, because those later shots in the sequence of the ships out at sea, those are 100% CG. They didn't turn over any plate for those at all. So it's like a reference like this is so useful, because the compositor will almost be using this as the background, building everything on top of it, and then getting rid of it. Obviously not tracking the camera or anything, but also maybe later more on where this particular image was intended for. It wasn't originally shot as reference. And here's putting together one of these full CG shots. Top left, sorry, it's very dark, but this is the sky and the ocean. The sky is a matte painting. It's like that. So even though we're out at sea, it does really help to be quite clear about where all the different cameras in the scene are pointing, because you do consciously or subconsciously pick up if there's a sort of discontinuity with the clouds or whatever. Then top left, you've got the background layer of ships and smoke and action. The fires were nearly always a mix of 2D elements where they worked and 3D elements where we couldn't get anything to work. And then bottom left, you've got the foreground ship. And again, you see where we could have rendered it all in one, but then if there's a mistake with something in the foreground but not in the background, you've got to do it all again. So it does help to split it up like this. And then bottom right, just seeing how much contribution essentially the comp and adding the atmosphere adds to the shot in the end, which just takes it all the way. So again, I'm very happy with the way that those shots came out. And here, I know this is what you really want to see. This is what you came for. So this is the script that made that shot on the left from start to finish. This is a close-up of the middle section here. You can see that green horizontal bit is there. And you can also see here in the script overview, that's what that is. So yeah, and then maybe every section that's this big has a pre-comp stuck at the end of it. And I kid you not, the compositor who works on this, you know, if you say like, oh, there's a sailor running along the deck of the boat and his shirt is like a little bit too white, it's sticking out, he will go straight here to the node and he knows, he's got it in his head. I love it when people are operating at that level. And I'm slightly agnostic about putting this slide in, because for me this is way too big. I never let my comps get this big. I would at least have them sort of split over literally separate comps so that they just run faster. But I think the reality is, when you're being asked to keep a lot of notes like floating up in the air and you need to be able to change things from day to day, the reality is this isn't that unusual for a shot like that, for the script to get that big. And this is in editorial using Hero. So the editor, a scene like this, it's really important for me to review in context the whole time. So our daily review sessions are based around the edit. And he'll be saving out scenes that I can view in Hero Player as well. Really useful. Okay, and that brings me to part 2. So this is the scene. We've gone to Paris, and Napoleon has been asked to suppress a riot that's going on in the streets. And we see how ruthless he is, because he opens fire on a crowd with live shot. So this is what they shot at Greenwich Naval College in London. So I'm not going to go too much into the environment here, but this is a really common location. You'll see it in so many different things that are shot in and around London. And the challenge is always to do something different to the buildings. And we were asked to Frenchify them, which was kind of fun trying to figure out what that meant. Turns out it meant adding that sort of particular angled roof. So you can see here you've got the two huge cranes with the jerk rigs attached to the stunt people. So each one of these people lying on the ground is a stunt actor, and the people that are running away on foot, the regular extras. Taking a look at this, and so we bid on a shot like this before you see it for the first time, and you see rig removal on crowd, and you think, oh, maybe 3 or 4 days prep for that. And then this comes in, and you think, oh, can I reconsider? This is a really nasty one. So before talking more about it, let's just see the end result. And remember, this is with the handles, so 8 extra frames at the start and finish, so it feels a bit longer than you might remember if you've seen it in the project. So again, I'm very happy with how this one turned out. It's got a lovely feel about it, and it's a good example of the Ridleys, which, for anyone who missed it yesterday, that's things that float in the air and give that sort of Ridley Scott cinematic depth to the atmosphere. This was a still that we were sent early on as a sort of art department reference, and it had notes attached to it. They said, this building is okay, everything back here, it's sort of the right scale, but it's not the right sort of architecture for Paris at that time. This is roughly the right idea, but it's not actually what we want. These trees, nobody likes them, but we think we need them because this has to be a separate pass from this. And we were like, oh, well, yeah, maybe we'll think about it. This is how you Frenchify Greenwich Naval College. That was a quick sketch. And they sort of said, yeah, that's basically the idea. Then the first step for us to do a DMP on a large scale like this, it gets reused over several shots. So it's worth building a 3D environment for it, especially when you've got these sort of irregular buildings and a street pattern that curves off. That just is, if you embark on the DMP like that, you're going to be left all the way through thinking, like, have they made a mistake with the perspective? I can't be completely sure. So it's always a good idea, if you have the resources, to start with a 3D base like that. That's the more or less final DMP back there. That's the final DMP pre-comped in the comp. So between the last slide and this slide, the compositor has got their hands on it and made it look much more real and beautiful, and added some trees as well. So we had 3D trees and real trees that they shot against blue for us. So they were thinking ahead with stuff like that. And here we've got our alternative take that they turned over, which looked the same as the plate that I showed you, but just a bit later in time. So that's the crowd back there. We're adding a layer of flags, which are very difficult to track in to make it look like the people are running with them. And more crowd. More crowd. And actually, they asked us to build CG crowd for this scene. They thought they were going to be needed for sure, particularly so that we could hit them with the cannon fire and really make some damage on screen. As it turns out, we managed to do a lot more with the 2D elements that they had provided, and I think they were quite surprised how much we could do with that. So we did get some CG crowd in, but and there's some back there as well, but it ended up being a much smaller part of the sequence than we were thinking. That's the plate going back on top. I think I wanted to put a slide of the roto in with all the different people, but I mean, this was huge. This was a huge roto job. And we asked them to supply it in 3 different layers, so background, midground, and foreground people, just to give us extra flexibility with the atmosphere and the Ridleys. And then, so from this one to this one, that is CG flags going in. So they wanted the flags to be torn apart as the grape shot goes through them. And the side effect of that is that it's a great excuse to get the Ridleys into the air, because it's the bits of cloth or like chicken feathers that seem to be floating about. And this gave us some significant pause for thought about how we do the flags. Do we need to roto-anim these real flags? That sounds difficult. Are we going to prep these real flags out because they're waving around in front of crowd faces? That sounds difficult too. And in the end, we thought maybe let's just try simming some flags and having them being torn apart, and we'll just make them slightly bigger than these ones and stick them over the top and see how that looks. And if we need to, we can prep out just where the holes are so that you can see the building behind. Well, it's not really prep out, you just let the DMP come through. Turns out that worked really well. But definitely, and I'm not going to show you again, well, I can if you like, but you can definitely see that there are flags, CG flags layered on top of real flags if you look very closely. But, you know, I think sometimes these things are acceptable, particularly as with a compositing mindset. Very important to know like where the line is. And most filmmakers, it's not, you know, it's normally that sort of goodwill is gone by the time it gets through to VFX, but most filmmakers are looking for, you know, a trick or a way to do things that seems reasonable because they know you're not doing it for real. And so, you know, my supervisor, Charlie, was on board with this approach. And yeah, there might be some duplicate edges, but because they were against moving crowd, we were like, we'll just leave them. No one's going to be looking there. Blood. Charlie mentioned it briefly yesterday. It was the costume department that said there is no blood going on any of our costumes today because we need them tomorrow. So this is one of the reasons that we definitely would have been adding more blood anyway, but one of the reasons why we had to, like literally every single person in the front row had to have their top or their clothes tracked in comp and have blood added. That brings me to more or less to the end. I didn't want to leave without just saying the working title of the show was Marengo, which is the name of Napoleon's favorite horse. And I found this out while working on the show. Turns out it's not the horse that NPC exploded in the middle of that sequence that you saw. It's the horse that he was riding at the Battle of Waterloo. And what I like is that the skeleton of his favourite horse, Marengo, has ended up in the National Army Museum in London, in Chelsea. So take that, Napoleon. And here's my favourite storyboard from Ridley, which was handed over one day, and they said, "Can you do this shot for us?" Sure, what is it? Can anyone see what it is? Any guesses? A castle, a boat, a ship? Yeah, so this is the storyboard there was a shot that we bid on, and this also represents my biggest regret, I guess, on the show, that we didn't get to do this shot, because this represents the Battle of Trafalgar. They didn't end up putting it in the final cut of the film, but they had a previs version of it, and we went as far as to start matching this layout. So they were just going to have one big shot that just dropped in and covered that moment and said, we've done that, tick that box. And they showed Ridley an early cut of the film where the editor, I'm told, just happened to leave that shot out. It wasn't really intentional. And then somebody said to Ridley, "Oh, did you miss that shot?" "No." "Well, it's an expensive one, so let's cut it." That's it. Thank you.